The broomstick bow is an active test that looks at a client's suitability for the conventional deadlift. This is important because some people lack the limb length or coordination necessary to perform the movement safely, so they may need to lift from blocks or use the sumo deadlift. Greater depth can be achieved by flexing the thoracic spine, but that's pretty advanced, so it won't be covered during this test. During the broomstick bow, we'll be looking to answer 6 questions. Can the client maintain a neutral spine? Can they hinge correctly at the hips? To what depth can they reach with vertical shins and a neutral spine? Do they commit a fault with the knees? Do their feet remain flat and balanced? And lastly, do they experience any pain during the movement? To perform this test, you'll need a flat surface, a broomstick, and a bench. If you don't have a bench, a chair can be used, but whatever object you choose, it must let the feet go underneath it. Let's have a look at the test. Joe's going to take the broomstick and walk up to the bench. He'll keep inching his feet forward until his legs make contact. His feet are flat, his shins are perpendicular to the floor, and his feet are directly under his hips. However, if you identified a wider deadlift stance during the hip scour or quadruped rock, use that width instead. Next, Joe's going to set up the broomstick. It goes along his spine, maintaining contact with 3 points: the head, the shoulders, and the butt. Maintaining those 3 points of contact with the broomstick provides Joe with a kinesthetic reference and me with a visual reference for a neutral spine. Notice how he's holding the broomstick. He uses an overhand grip with the thumbs pointing down. Using an underhand grip would put the hands between the broomstick and the body and break points of contact. If Joe had a ponytail or a bun, he'd shift the broomstick to rest alongside it. Now he's in a position to begin the test. Joe's job is to get as much hip flexion as possible while maintaining all 4 points of contact: the knees or shins against the bench, and the broomstick in contact with the head, shoulders, and butt. As Joe's conducting the test, I'll begin working through those questions. First, does he maintain a neutral spine? I'll watch to see if space appears between the broomstick and a point of contact, as that will indicate a loss of spine position. Second, how does he hinge at the hips? Is the movement controlled or awkward? Any shaking or stuttering indicates an awkward hip hinge and a potential lack of glute control that needs to be addressed in training. Third, does he extend the knees or push them forward? Watch how the knees interact with the bench. If they lose contact, it's an indication that he's extended his knees. If the bench moves forward, it shows that he's flexed his knees. We don't want to see either fault. The shin should remain vertical throughout the test. Fourth, do his feet remain flat and balanced? Deadlifts are hard enough already. We don't want to make it more difficult by compromising the only point of contact with the floor. The feet should point straight ahead or be toed out, but no greater than 45 degrees, and the feet should remain flat throughout the movement, with the balance point being the front of the heel. Lifting the toes will shift that point of balance rearward, while lifting the heels shifts it forward. Both will create instability and have a negative effect on performance in the deadlift. The next question to answer is the depth of his reach, but before I get to that, I need to explain to Joe what's going to happen. Joe's going to slowly repeat the movement until I tell him to stop. Where I tell him to stop will be the lowest position he can achieve without compromising his feet, spine, or knee position. From there, I'm going to take the broomstick off him and he'll let his arms hang alongside his legs. During that process, I'm watching to make sure he doesn't break that good position, and then I'll look at his reach. Reach is measured from the middle of the palm and recorded as above the knee, at the knee, or below the knee. For the conventional deadlift, his reach needs to be at or below the knee. If it isn't, there are two primary faults that occur. The first is dragging the bar over flexed knees, causing the bar to move forward of the balance point. People can get away with this at lighter weights by using their body to counterbalance the load. However, at heavier weights, that doesn't work and you'll see missed lifts or rounding of the spine. Rounding of the spine is our second fault. Flexing the spine will allow someone to artificially extend their reach, but doing so during the deadlift is a mechanism for spinal injury. This is because flexing or extending the spine during axial compression delaminates the intervertebral discs and increases the likelihood of rupture, so don't tolerate it. There is a method of lifting with a flexed thoracic spine, but it's an advanced technique that requires immense control. Unless you know what you're doing, stick to lifting with a neutral spine. So if Joe's reach is above the knee, he needs to lift from blocks or try the sumo deadlift. Lastly, I'll ask whether Joe experienced any pain during the movement and mark his answer in the screening performer. Before we move on, here's a few key points to keep in mind during the broomstick bow. First, the client's doing most of the work, so before you start testing them, they'll need a demonstration of the movement. Once you've demonstrated the movement, coach them through it a couple of times to ensure they understand it. Second, 4 points of contact need to be maintained throughout the assessment. The knees or shins remain in contact with the bench, and the broomstick maintains contact with the head, shoulders, and butt. And finally, make sure the client walks into the bench or chair until their legs make contact. Don't let them stop short and push their knees into the bench. The data you've collected in this test can be compared to the arch test and the glute function test. The arch test looks at whether a client has the strength and coordination to resist flexion of the spine. This is crucial to performing the deadlift. If your client struggles to maintain a neutral spine during the broomstick bow, use the arch test to understand why that's happening and address it in your programming. The glute function test looks for motor faults that compromise flexion and extension of the hip. If your client hinges awkwardly at the hips, use the glute function test to determine whether a motor fault could be contributing to the problem. The broomstick bow also provides coaches with a few kinesthetic references for other movements. Maintaining those 3 points of contact with the broomstick can be used to teach a neutral spine position. And with the exception of the arms, the broomstick bow is a fantastic tool for teaching and assessing deadlift mechanics. By maintaining those 4 points of contact with the bench and broomstick, it's difficult to perform the movement incorrectly. So it's a useful tool for clients that don't always have a coach around to correct their faults. Lastly, the broomstick bow can be used to teach someone how to break at the hips during a squat while maintaining a neutral spine. Just keep in mind that it only teaches the initial break. Everything after that is a combination of hip, knee, and ankle flexion, and therefore outside the scope of the broomstick bow. To sum up, the broomstick bow is an active test that looks at a client's suitability for the conventional deadlift. This is important because some people lack the limb length or coordination necessary to perform the movement safely, so they may need to lift from blocks or use the sumo deadlift.